The diner hummed with the usual chatter of patrons and the clatter of dishes, a cozy but unassuming roadside spot tucked away on the edge of Carmel, California. Among the tables sat a tall, lean man with silver hair, quietly reading a newspaper while sipping black coffee. His presence didn't demand attention, but there was an unmistakable air about him, something subtle yet magnetic. Few noticed him, and even fewer recognized him, except for the occasional double-take. Clint Eastwood had always enjoyed blending, and today was no different. At a nearby table, a group of tourists commented on the restaurant's charm and the food's quality. "I heard this place is owned by someone famous," one said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "Who?" another asked, eyes wide with curiosity. Before they could puzzle it out, a sharp voice interrupted the moment. "Can I get you anything else, or are we just taking up space?" said the waitress, her tone dripping with impatience. She stood at their table, pen poised over her notepad, but with an unmistakable edge in her voice. Her name tag read Sandy, and while her no-nonsense attitude was part of her charm for regulars, newcomers often found her demeanor abrasive. The tourists exchanged uncomfortable glances and politely declined, clearly taken aback. Sandy sighed dramatically, muttering something under her breath as she pivoted away toward the counter. Clint, who had quietly observed the scene, raised an eyebrow but remained engrossed in his newspaper. When it came time to clear Clint's table, Sandy strode over with the same brisk energy. "You done here?" she asked curtly without looking at him. "Yes, ma'am," Clint replied in his gravelly voice, folding the paper neatly. "Great," she quipped. "You know, next time, maybe don't camp out with 1 cup of coffee for 2 hours. We run a restaurant, not a library." Her words were sharp, but her tone was laced with the kind of casual dismissal that suggested she didn't see him as anyone worth impressing. Clint chuckled softly, his weathered face breaking into a slight grin. "I'll keep that in mind," he said, sliding a $20 bill under the edge of his plate. As Sandy walked away, another server approached her wide-eyed. "Do you know who that is?" they whispered urgently. "Yeah, some guy who thinks coffee refills are free just because he's old," Sandy replied with a shrug. "That's Clint Eastwood," the server hissed. "He owns this place." Sandy froze mid-step, her face draining of color. The realization hit her like a freight train. Her eyes darted toward the door just in time to see Clint casually stroll out, tipping his hat to a passing customer. "Oh my God," she muttered, her tough exterior crumbling into sheer panic. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" The rest of the staff couldn't help but laugh, but their amusement was short-lived when Clint returned a few moments later. He held the door open for a couple entering the diner, then walked back toward Sandy, who stood frozen in place. "I hear the service. Here is hit or miss," Clint said, his tone calm but carrying a playful edge. "Might want to work on that." Sandy stammered, fumbling for an apology, but Clint waved her off with a grin. "Relax," he said. "Everyone has their moments. Just don't let it happen again, all right?" With that, he walked away, leaving Sandy to process the surreal encounter. The staff couldn't stop teasing her for weeks, but Sandy took the lesson to heart, treating every customer with a little more patience, just in case another Hollywood legend happened to wander in. As the days passed, Sandy couldn't shake the memory of her encounter with Clint Eastwood. It wasn't just the embarrassment that stuck with her. It was the way he handled it. He could have come down hard on her, made a scene, but instead, he'd let it slide with that calm, almost fatherly demeanor. It made her wonder about the man behind the image. Soon enough, the story of Clint Eastwood's surprise ownership became a favorite topic among the staff. At first, they thought it would just be a funny anecdote that would fade with time, but as the weeks wore on, they noticed something different about Sandy. She had become more attentive, more considerate, with a sharp focus on giving every customer the best service she could manage, especially the grumpy ones. It was as though that single moment of humiliation had changed her entire outlook. Then one day, Clint returned. Not a regular visit like before, where he blended in with the crowd, but this time he was there for something specific. Sandy spotted him walking in through the door, dressed in a simple jacket and jeans, his gait as steady as ever. Her pulse quickened. She wondered if this was going to be another test, but when he caught her eye, He gave her a small nod and a polite wave. "Hey, Sandy," Clint said, sliding into a booth by the window. "How have you been?" "Good. I mean, great, Mr. Eastwood," she stammered, mentally cursing herself for falling into formality when he had clearly preferred something more casual. "What can I get you?" He smiled, a rare warmth to it. "How about that coffee you thought I'd camp out on? Just black, and a side of quiet. I've got some thinking to do." Sandy took the order, a little unsure but determined not to make the same mistake again. She returned with the coffee, setting it down in front of him with a respectful smile. This time she noticed something subtle, the way Clint looked out the window, his face reflecting the soft light of the late morning. "Need anything else?" she asked, trying her best to keep the conversation light. Clint looked up at her, his eyes thoughtful as though weighing something in his mind. "You know, Sandy, sometimes it takes a little jolt to realize we're not as big as we think we are." Sandy's brow furrowed, unsure if he was talking about her or something larger. "It's easy to get caught up in our roles," he continued, stirring his coffee slowly. "But sometimes we need to remember there's always someone watching, and in your case, someone who owns the place." Sandy felt a flush of warmth. Was he actually acknowledging how much she'd grown since their first encounter? She nodded. "I get it, Mr. Eastwood. I've been working on it, making sure every customer feels like they matter." He gave her a small, approving nod. "Keep it up. The world needs more people who care, even in the little things." And with that, Clint Eastwood, the man who had inadvertently taught her a lesson in humility and customer service, returned to his thoughts. Sandy stood there for a moment, watching him quietly, realizing that sometimes lessons don't come in the form of reprimands, they come in quiet moments of reflection. That day, Sandy wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was someone who had learned how to see beyond the surface, how to turn a mistake into an opportunity, and how to respect the people around her, no matter who they were. And Clint? He never became the talk of the town again. Instead, he faded into the background, like the modest owner he was. The diner went on with its humdrum routine, but the people who worked there had changed, quietly better for having crossed paths with a legend who had shown them the value of simplicity. Over time, the diner became something more than just a roadside stop. It grew into a place with a reputation not just for its food, but for its warm atmosphere. Sandy, who had once been known for her sharp tongue and brusque demeanor, became a bit of a local legend herself. Customers began to request her by name, praising her quick wit and genuine attentiveness. It turned out she had a knack for making people feel welcome when she chose to channel her energy the right way. Clint continued to stop by occasionally, always unassuming and low-key. He never flaunted his ownership, nor did he expect special treatment. To most of the regulars, he was just the quiet guy by the window. But for those who knew, like Sandy and the staff, his presence carried a weight that went beyond celebrity status. It was a reminder that even the most ordinary-seeming moments could hold extraordinary lessons. One afternoon, several months after their first encounter, Sandy noticed Clint talking to a young couple at a corner booth. They looked like they were in their early 20s, their faces full of nervous energy. Clint was leaning slightly forward, speaking in his calm, measured way. Whatever he was saying seemed to put them at ease. After a few minutes, he stood up, patted the young man on the shoulder, and left a generous tip on the table before walking out the door. Curious, Sandy approached the couple to clear the table and couldn't resist asking, "What did he say to you?" The young woman smiled, her eyes still shining. "He told us to stick to our dreams, that no matter how hard it gets, you have to keep pushing through. He said he started from nothing too, and look where it got him." Sandy couldn't help but smile. That sounded like Clint. He didn't just own the diner, he seemed to own every room he walked into, simply by being himself. Later that evening, as Sandy was closing up, she thought about everything that had changed since Clint had first walked into her life. She remembered the embarrassment, the panic, and the realization that had hit her like a bolt of lightning. But more than that, she remembered how he had handled it with grace. He hadn't tried to humiliate her or pull rank. He had simply let her learn the lesson on her own. As she locked up and turned off the lights, she noticed a folded piece of paper on one of the tables. It was Clint's usual booth. She picked it up and unfolded it, revealing a handwritten note in his distinct scrawl. "Sandy, proud of the way you turned things around. You've got the grit to make this place and yourself better every day. Keep at it. Clint." Tears pricked at her eyes as she held the note. It wasn't just the words, it was the recognition. Clint had seen her, really seen her, not just as a waitress but as a person with potential. And that, she realized, was the kind of impact she wanted to have on others. From that day forward, Sandy didn't just work at the diner, she became part of its soul. And while Clint Eastwood remained a quiet and humble owner, his presence was felt in every corner of the place, not because of his fame, but because of the way he had quietly inspired everyone around him. The diner thrived, not because of the celebrity behind it, but because of the people within it, each one a little better, a little stronger, and a little kinder, thanks to one unforgettable lesson in humility and grace. Years passed, and the diner grew into more than just a pit stop for travelers. It became a hub for locals, a place where stories were shared, friendships were forged, and memories were made. Sandy's transformation became a cornerstone of its success. Her sharp wit was now tempered with warmth, and her ability to make each customer feel valued became something of a trademark. People would say, "Go to the diner and ask for Sandy, she'll take care of you," and they meant it in more ways than one. Clint, true to his nature, never sought the spotlight. He continued to visit sporadically, always choosing the same booth by the window. He'd order his black coffee, sometimes with a slice of pie, and quietly observe the lively atmosphere. To him, the diner represented something pure, a slice of normalcy in a chaotic world. But he also recognized the magic of what it had become, thanks to the people who worked there and the community they served. One day, Sandy noticed Clint lingering longer than usual. He wasn't reading his paper or sipping his coffee. He was simply watching. The diner was busier than ever, filled with the hum of conversation and laughter. Kids were sharing milkshakes at the counter, couples were leaning in close over plates of comfort food, and the staff moved like a well-oiled machine, their banter light and their smiles genuine. It was a scene that could have been pulled straight from a movie, and Clint seemed to be soaking it all in. As Sandy approached his table to refill his coffee, Clint looked up and gave her a small smile. "Busy day?" he remarked. "Always is. These days," she replied, setting the pot down. "You've got a knack for running a place people love, Mr. Eastwood." He chuckled softly. "Takes more than owning it. Places like this are built on heart, and you've got plenty of that, Sandy. This place wouldn't be what it is without you." Sandy felt a swell of pride, but before she could respond, Clint continued. "I've been thinking," he said, leaning back in his seat. "I'm not getting any younger, and it might be time to step back a bit. Hand the reins over to someone who really understands what makes this place special." Her heart skipped a beat. "Are you saying—" He nodded, his eyes steady. "I want you to take over, Sandy. You've proven you care about this place, and the people who walk through that door. You've got the grit, the drive, and the heart to keep it going." For a moment, she was too stunned to speak. The idea of owning the diner, of being entrusted with something so important, was overwhelming. But as she looked around at the bustling room, at the faces of the regulars she'd come to know and care for, she realized that Clint was right. This wasn't just a job anymore. It was her life's work. "I don't know what to say," she finally managed, her voice thick with emotion. "Say you'll think about it," Clint said with a smile. "You don't have to decide today. Just know that when you're ready, it's yours." The weight of his words settled over her, but it wasn't a burden. It was an honor. As Clint left the diner that day, tipping his hat as he always did, Sandy stood at the window, watching him go. She knew her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine, but she also knew one thing for certain. She would do everything in her power to honor the trust he'd placed in her. From that day forward, the diner became not just a testament to Clint Eastwood's quiet influence, but a symbol of what people could achieve when they believed in themselves and each other. Under Sandy's leadership, It continued to thrive, becoming a beloved fixture in the community. And though Clint no longer visited as often, his presence was always felt, not just in the memories of those who had met him, but in the spirit of the place he had built and passed on with faith and grace. As the years unfolded, the diner flourished under Sandy's ownership, but it wasn't just about the business. It was about the legacy she was building. Every corner of the diner seemed to carry a piece of Clint Eastwood's quiet wisdom, and Sandy made sure to preserve the values he had instilled: humility, hard work, and treating people with dignity. She renovated parts of the building to modernize it while keeping its vintage charm intact, adding a small plaque near the entrance that read, "This diner was built on heart and grit. May it always serve with both." The community responded with enthusiasm, and soon, the diner became a landmark in Carmel. Travelers from far and wide stopped by, some drawn by whispers of Clint Eastwood's connection, while others came simply because of its reputation for great food and even better hospitality. Sandy became a local icon in her own right, known for her sharp humor, endless energy, and the way she could make even a stranger feel like family. One day, a film crew showed up, led by a young director who claimed to be a huge Clint Eastwood fan. They wanted to shoot a short documentary about the diner, its history, and its connection to Clint. At first, Sandy was hesitant. She didn't want to exploit the name of the man who had trusted her with so much. But when the director assured her it would focus on the spirit of the place and the people who kept it alive, she agreed. During the filming, Sandy shared the story of her first encounter with Clint. She spoke about the embarrassment, the lessons learned, and how it had shaped not just her career but her perspective on life. The crew filmed the staff in action, regulars sharing their favorite stories and the laughter that filled the air on any given day. It was a celebration of everything the diner had become, not just because of Clint's name, but because of the people who carried on his vision. When the documentary aired, it quickly gained attention, drawing even more visitors to the diner. But the fame didn't change Sandy or the staff. They stayed grounded, focused on what mattered most, making every person who walked through the door feel welcome. Clint, now well into his later years, heard about the documentary from an old friend and decided to pay a quiet visit. He arrived, one crisp autumn morning, slipping into his usual booth by the window. Sandy noticed him immediately and brought over his black coffee without a word, just a knowing smile. "It's been a while," Clint said, his voice as steady as ever. "Too long," Sandy replied, sitting down across from him for the first time. She had never felt confident enough to share a table with him until now, but this time, it felt right. "What brings you back?" He gestured around the diner, which was buzzing with life even on a weekday morning. "Just wanted to see how you're doing. Seems like you've got it all figured out," Sandy chuckled. "Not all of it, but enough to keep the wheels turning. It's not just me, though. Everyone here makes it what it is." Clint smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "That's the trick. Surround yourself with good people, and the rest falls into place." They sat there for a while, talking about life, the diner, and the future. Clint didn't stay long, but before he left, he handed Sandy a folded piece of paper. "One last thing," he said. "This is for you." Sandy unfolded it after he left, her heart racing. It was a handwritten letter, officially transferring full ownership of the diner to her, free and clear. At the bottom, he'd written, "Keep the heart and grit alive. I couldn't have picked a better person for the job." Tears welled in her eyes as she read the words. It wasn't just the gesture, it was the belief he had in her, the trust that had grown from a moment of humility years ago. From that day on, Sandy ran the diner with even more pride and determination. Clint's occasional visits became fewer as he retreated further into his quiet life, but his legacy remained, not just in the diner, but in the lives he had touched along the way. And for Sandy, every coffee poured, every plate served, and every smile shared was a reminder of the man who had taught her the value of humility, grace, and the simple power of believing in someone. The diner wasn't just a business. It was a testament to what could happen when someone gave you a second chance and showed you what you were capable of becoming. As the years turned into decades, the diner became a generational staple. Sandy poured her heart into it every single day, ensuring that every customer felt the warmth and connection that Clint Eastwood had envisioned when he first opened the place. The diner didn't just serve food, it served moments. Proposals happened over milkshakes, birthdays were celebrated with pies fresh from the oven, and even small-town debates were hashed out over endless cups of coffee. Sandy eventually expanded the diner, adding an outdoor seating area surrounded by blooming flowers and a small garden where they grew fresh herbs and vegetables for the kitchen. She kept the menu simple, sticking to the classics that had always worked but adding a few signature dishes named after Clint's most iconic films. The Gran Torino grilled cheese and High Plains drifter hash became instant favorites, drawing in curious travelers and die-hard Clint fans alike. One morning, many years later, Sandy was sitting in Clint's old booth sipping her coffee as the early morning sun filtered through the windows. She had slowed down a bit, now in her 60s, but she still made a point to open the diner every day, greeting the first customers with the same enthusiasm she'd had as a waitress decades ago. Her hair was streaked with silver now, but her sharp wit and kind smile hadn't faded. As she gazed out the window, a familiar figure emerged from a car parked outside. Her breath caught as an older Clint Eastwood stepped into the diner. His gait was slower now, his frame leaner, but his presence was just as commanding as ever. The room fell silent as people began to recognize him. Even after all these years, his aura was unmistakable. Sandy rose from her seat, her heart full of emotion as she walked over to greet him. "Mr. Eastwood," she said, her voice steady but warm. "It's been far too long." He smiled, his eyes still holding that same thoughtful gleam. "Sandy, it's good to see you." She led him to his usual booth, and for the first time in years he ordered more than just coffee, a full breakfast complete with eggs, bacon, and toast. As they sat together, the two of them caught up on life. Clint shared stories of his quiet retirement, and Sandy told him about all the milestones the diner had celebrated in his absence. "This place," Clint said, gesturing around the bustling diner, "it's everything I ever hoped it would be, and more." "That's because of you," Sandy replied, her voice filled with gratitude. "You believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself. Everything here started with you." He shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I gave you the spark, Sandy, but you built the fire, and you kept it burning." Before he left, Clint handed Sandy a small gift box. Inside was a golden key, intricately designed, with a tag that read, "To the heart of the diner, thank you for keeping the dream alive." Tears welled in her eyes as she held the key, realizing it symbolized not just ownership but the trust, respect, and connection they had shared over the years. Clint's visit became the talk of the town, but for Sandy, it was something much deeper. It was a reminder of how far she had come, of the journey that had started with a sharp comment and a lesson in humility. That golden key was placed in a frame on the wall, a tribute to the man who had quietly shaped so many lives with his wisdom and grace. As the years went on, Sandy eventually passed the reins of the diner to a younger generation, her niece, who had grown up watching her aunt pour her soul into the place. Sandy retired, but she still visited often, sitting in Clint's old booth, now dubbed the Legends Corner, and watching the next chapter of the diner unfold. Clint Eastwood's influence remained woven into the fabric of the diner, not just as a name whispered with awe, but as a reminder that kindness, second chances, and believing in others can create something truly extraordinary. And so, the diner stood, a timeless beacon of heart and grit, where every cup of coffee and every slice of pie carried a little bit of history and a whole lot of love.